Hey there, everybody. Welcome to my channel, The Magical Solution. My name is Leilani, and this is how we grow. Tonight, we are inviting back one of our favorite guests. You might remember them from the Stregoneria, right? Did I get this right? Stregoneria? I'll ask him again because this was the whole part of the conversation the last time video, which so many of you guys loved so much, and many of you guys begged me to bring this person back. So, of course, I had to give him to you, of course. But we're not going to talk about just anything. I feel like, this subject has been a long time coming, and both Gianmichael and I, Dr. Gianmichael and I, have definitely felt like this needs to be talked about. Now, he is way more experienced in this subject than I am. And so tonight we get to ask all the questions. We get to learn all the things. But first, let's do a quick little intro because you guys already know who I'm talking about. And so this is for the people who don't know, because now you know, right? Gianmichael Salvato is a gender non-conforming author, naturopath, anthropologist, alchemist, intersectional feminist, queer activist, herbalist, contemplative mystic, and a lifelong practitioner of Afro-Sicilian esotericism and magic. They are the founder of the Inner Alchemy Mystery School, a semi-retired Eastern Catholic bishop, and the executive director of the Contemplative Order of Compassion Sanctuary. Listen to me. That's a very small bio. And thank you so much, Gianmichael, for sending that to me. But I'm telling you, that bio is much more extensive and much more longer than the one that we just did. So please check out their website. Definitely check out the Inner Alchemy Mystery School. It is an amazing school, has a Facebook group, and does interviews and conversations with some of the most brilliant minds in all various types of subjects in the spiritual realm, and you will not be disappointed if you take a look at that. Okay, so come on, enough of me talking, Leilani. Shut up. Let's bring him on. Oh my god, here we go. Hey. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We missed you. We had so much fun the last time. It's Stregoneria, right?
In Spanish, it's stregoneria. In when you pronounce the Italian word, in Italian and Sicilian, it's stregoneria.
Stregoneria. I'll get it. I will get it.
But it's my fault because when we started the YouTube channel some years ago, every time I said stregoneria, YouTube thought I was speaking English, and so they would caption stray gonorrhea.
Oh my god.
So I started saying stregoneria so YouTube would say, oh, this isn't an English word, and just leave it.
Right. So I'm going to actually link that right now, you guys. I'm putting it into the comments, and I will also update the description below, linking us back to that last video because you guys definitely need to check that one out. But today we are here to talk about a very I don't want to say controversial subject, but a subject that is really misunderstood. And I'm so glad that you're going to come on here to talk about this. So in case those of you who are joining us here for the very first time and have not seen the advertisements yet, we are going to be talking about mushrooms and mycelium, but I really kind of want to focus on your experiences with it and the relationship that it has with nature and with our spiritual practice, and sort of like that trifecta, how we all kind of bridge those gaps because of the mycelium. So let's start with you. What got you into studying fungi and incorporating it into your practices?
Sure. Well, as a way of starting, and thanks so much for having me back on your show. The viewers of our podcast love your show. The students in the school love your show. I love your show. So it's cool to just be able to hang out. And we were talking before we went live that I hope this summer I get up to New York so I can like hang out in person and
Yeah.
we can have all the conversations. But, for me, the journey began. I went into seminary when I was 16 years old, and I grew up in an Afro-Sicilian, Southern Italian magical practice. And within that practice, we were told from the time we were kids, not just from family members, but also from the nuns in school, because I went to an almost all Italian Catholic school, that in the earliest days of what some might call the Jesus movement, others might call the pre-institutional church or pre-colonialized church. The Eucharist itself, that sacred meal that sits at the center of most of the Christian traditions, is was something that was confected. It was actually performed by women in the church, not by men. So we have a history in our family of passing down this formula for making a sacred wine and making a sacred bread that were entheogenic. In other words, that provided a psychedelic experience. And so I grew up aware of this when I was 16. Before I went in seminary, I was taught by my aunts what the formula was. We made a batch, and I took it. I was supposed to take it that night on Holy Saturday night, the night before Easter, and I didn't because I fell asleep. So I didn't want the aunts to know that I didn't take it. So I took it right before we left for Mass. And when I got to Mass, I had the most incredible psychedelic experience. And now it was a little messy, like to have to deal with them about it.
Right.
I essentially saw the oneness of everything, and it deconstructed my religion in a moment. But it also put me on this path. It said, there's something here that goes well beyond Catholic Eucharist and connects to our magical past in ways that are way bigger than just the fact that our lineage was among the many who carry this tradition. So I started doing research, and as as far as the present day, I kept it quiet because my feeling was I didn't want to be the person putting all of the really wild ideas out there and then having to spend all my time explaining that.
And
So
defending it. Yeah.
I've always said when science catches up, I'll start to talk about it. And a couple of years ago, science caught up. Johns
Yeah.
Hopkins University caught up. A brilliant researcher by the name of Brian Murarescu started doing some research at the Vatican and in Greece and throughout the ancient world. They wrote a book called The Immortality Key. That started to show up, and I was like, okay, I can finally start to talk to people about something that I only taught the magical practitioners in our school, and that's where we are today.
Amazing. Listen, okay, so it was so funny because I remember, I think it was either 1 or 2 years ago, where you spoke to me about a little bit, and you're like, hey, are you noticing some stuff that's happening like in the news and the Netflix documentaries and all this stuff that's coming out? And I was like, yeah, like it's really weird. And then we got the different shows, like the TV series that are starting to come out that are all about fungi and mushroom and stuff. And it was starting to sort of pile up, and I was looking at this like, there's something there's a message that community needs to know, because these things don't happen by accident. Messages and information, especially spiritual messages, are descended upon us a little at a time based on our progress, based on whether or not we're ready to hear it. And I think you're right. I think within the last like 2 to 3 years, we've been ready to hear it and talk about it. People are sort of moving out of this phase of looking at these psychedelics as just, oh man, we're gonna trip balls this weekend, and start moving into things like microdosing and moving into things like how it can help with, mental health and depression and things like that. How do, if you don't mind me asking, aside from these very magical and beautiful formulas that you have in your Catholic practice, how else do you utilize mushrooms, mycelium, and just fungi in general?
Sure. Well, and it's, honestly, it is less about the Catholic practice. That's almost sort of an incidental at this point, because what I've come to understand, and researchers are understanding, is that this is just a continuum back to the ancient world. It's a practice that had nothing literally to do with Catholicism, but it had to do with the fact that the mystery school traditions, among which probably the pre-Christian church is believed to be a mystery school tradition, was were committed to people connecting with the source of their power, owning their power, coming into their power, and recognizing that sort of this idea that we grow up in a world where people are saying, "Oh, that's a sin," and "That's not a sin." That all that does is make us feel guilty about being human. And it distances us from our ego. It distances us from being a whole person. And so the mystery schools taught from the ancient world, that there is no separation. So sin, if you want to call it that, is nothing more than forgetting that you're one with source, that there's
Exactly.
nothing that separates you from the birther of the cosmos. And if that's the truth, then your power is limitless. And so entheogens, particularly mushrooms and fermented grain, not only provide us with a pathway for a spiritual journey that takes us into that awareness, into that unification with source that so many people experience when they were just out to trip balls. And they're like, "Oh my God!" Like there's in Johns Hopkins, they realized that so many of the people who were in their study who were atheists or agnostics came out of the experience of doing psychedelics with a belief in source, because they experienced it, and they experienced it as not separate from themselves. So that's the only way that you know it's real, is when you realize it's your truest nature. And
Right.
then when we take that to our magical practice, it opens us, it shifts from what I see as being kind of the focus of a lot of magical, a lot of esotericism in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. It was all about celebrating us, celebrating who we are, our uniqueness, kind of being revolutionary and pushing back against the patriarchy,
For sure.
all of which were important. But it takes us to where so much of your work, for example, comes to play. Where the other day you were talking about Khalsas, and how you had that experience when coming home. That just illustrates in one of the most powerful and beautiful ways that source is not giving us these experiences to as an external thing that's letting you see, "Oh, look how magical and powerful you are. You can see a swarm." It's
Right.
giving you an opportunity to heal another part of yourself that's expressing as that person on the side of the road.
Say it. Yes,
That's
preach.
the value. That is the value.
That
Is
is the
is it,
value.
it frees us to be the magical beings we were meant to be, which are healers, and recognizing that there's only two things that exist in this world. It's either love or it's fear. And
Right.
love or source or compassion and wisdom, if you operate from that basis, that you're in your power, then fear doesn't arise. Fear only arises when we forget that we can't be not in that power, that it's just a delusion.
Exactly. When you were saying how, like, some people, when they take this drug, and to know that it's real, you sort of get this sense of oneness, this unification between you and spirit. I've also seen where individuals who are very narcissistic and very, like, libertarian, conservative, very, like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps type of mentality, who have taken mushrooms, and have come out going, oh shit, I'm not the only one in the world, and people do have feelings, and then they want to like be more communal, and they, you know, these things get challenged. So it's much bigger than just, you know, you tripping out in a field and going, oh yeah, like I'm one with God, you know. It's really, you're one with literally everything, and everything matters. And that is a concept that I think it's kind of like trying to imagine what infinity is. You know, like it's just so big for the freaking mind. But the mushrooms somehow make it so that it is digestible. It's something that you can understand and not like short circuit. You know? Now here's my question for you though. Like, do you find this to be sort of like cheating? You know what I mean? Like when we talk a lot about mystics and like discipline and like some of the practices that we have to engage in order to really develop our spiritual you know, faculties, in order to do X, Y, and Z, they're like, oh, you got to meditate, you got to do this, you got to read this, you got to. And do you ever feel like drugs, psychedelics, shrooms in general are like a shortcut or like a cheat code? How do you feel about that?
That's an awesome question. And while I'm, you know, certainly a libertarian, and I really try, sometimes failingly, to not judge people who choose to use whatever they want in their lives, including illicit drugs. I don't, you know, I try not to judge that. I do believe that this is distinct from drugs. I do believe, while there's evidence that people have had the same types of awakenings with LSD in clinical settings, even in non-clinical settings, you know, Ram Dass's story is, and Timothy Leary's story is a good example.
Yeah.
Here's where I think it's not cheating. Now, I think when you take chemicals, you are messing with your source of power. But the chemicals quite often are, we find people who do that as people who are wounded, and they need to be able to, in their minds, self-medicate in order to not have to feel their pain. So that is a shortcut that's doomed for failure. You may have an awareness, you may have an awakening, and in a couple weeks, you're going to be right back where you started. But if you were in a couple months or whatever, because you're not addressing, it's a big buzzword today, and I hate to even use it. Everything is, oh, that's my trauma, that's my trauma, that's my PTSD. Well, we don't understand. It's not your trauma, it's your trauma response. And if your trauma
Yes.
response is taking drugs, you're going to continue to experience that trauma response, because it's just an opportunity for you to heal,
Right.
and drugs aren't going to heal you. So and drinking's not going to heal you, and abusing anything, abusing food isn't going to heal you. It's only going to create more manifestations of the same imbalance. But this, by contrast, using mushrooms, particularly the ones that are used in the ancient traditions, are Amanita muscaria. They're not the psychedelics of the 60s, you know, that cause you cause you sort of that peyote experience, the really trippy trip.
Yeah.
The Amanita muscaria, which still does cause you to have some pretty wild experiences, is what the Siberians used that caused them to create the imagery that would become Santa Claus. It would cause them to think the reindeers could fly, because the Siberian shaman would drink the urine of the reindeer who ate the mushroom, and
Ah.
not realizing that they could have really skipped the Shivi part and just gone straight to the mushrooms. But there was a reason.
It's
And
sanitized.
the reason was that source understood that if they ate the mushrooms by themselves, and anybody who's experimented with entheogens is going to know what I'm going to say. You eat the mushrooms yourself, be prepared for 30 minutes of hurling your guts up and talking on the big porcelain phone to source, because that ibotenic acid, that's one part of the compound, makes you nauseated, and it causes that upheaval. And what it's doing spiritually is it's also releasing toxins in your bloodstream to get that out of the way. So when
Yep.
somebody does an entheogen, I like to think of it as sort of the aid, the assist, rather than cheating to help you get the stuff out of the way. It's the same thing as meditating, because it forces you to go into a meditative state. It just disables your ability to what we call, my husband calls seeing kitties. So like when you're doing a meditation, you're trying to be all pious and all that, and then your mind sees a little sparkly object and you saw a kitty, and now
Yeah.
you gotta go back to try and recover
Try
that.
again. With mushrooms, there's no choice. You got 8 hours, you in that shit.
You are there. You got a 20-minute lead up, and in that 20 minutes, all of that shit, all of that chaotic data floods your brain, and you're for a few minutes, you're just like, oh man, I'm really fucked up. And then boom, you're in this place of what the Buddhists would call calm abiding. You're in this like state of bliss. You begin to taste that nectar that the mystics talk about and say is that self-awareness. It's the mother dripping in the back of your throat.
Oh my God, I love that. Okay, so I'm going to make a mild comparison. Have you ever tried salvia?
Yes.
Okay, so with an experience I had with salvia was that my legs felt like tree trunks. And I felt literally like I was rooted into the ground and I could not move, to the point where my physical body could not move. Like people tried to pull my arms and they were like, come on, Leilani, take a step. I'm like, no, bitch, it's not happening. And so my point in bringing that up is that I oftentimes get the same senses when I engage in mushrooms for my spiritual practices. I get a very rooted, grounded sense. But there are so many people that I've heard report that their experience is much more in the head. It causes a lot of distress. But for me, it's very peaceful and it's very rooting and it's very inspiring. So what's the deal with these different experiences? Is it because of the mindset that you go into it with? Is it, are there circumstances, like, do you have to have a nice environment with candles lit and stuff like that? Like, what's up with that?
All right. That's a fantastic question, and I hope you'll back me on this. That for your viewers, we didn't talk about this ahead of time,
Oh,
but
definitely
I
not.
think that is an
We're winging this
amazing.
tonight.
That's an amazing question. That's how we do it all the time. That's an amazing question because so many people, if you don't know what we're talking about, go on YouTube, but set a timer because this is a rabbit hole, and do Salvia Divinorum trips, and you'll see people acting such a fool, just jumping up and down, doing crazy stuff, hallucinating. And so what happens is, and you actually set my response up perfectly. So that's why to me it felt like, wow, we couldn't have rehearsed this better. Um, the difference between your experience and theirs is, one, yes, partially mindset. There, a lot of these other people are approaching this as an opportunity for escape, as an opportunity just to get high, or as an opportunity to let me see what this does. And because of that, because they're not properly prepared, not just with environment, which really does play an important part, and
It
it's
does, man.
unique. Like I can't say you got to play music because for some people, silence is their music. I can't say light candles. For other people, for some people, the dark is their environment, or for the others, it's light.
Yeah.
With whatever environment brings you that calmness. But what they don't know is, like with salvia, you clearly use the right dose, the dose that shaman would use, and even transcultural shaman from medicine workers from other traditions, and that the way that you know whether you did or you didn't, and same thing with mushrooms, is the word that you used was rootedness, when you felt like your feet were tree trunks. And that's because the source, it's not the mycelium themselves that are it's not the mushrooms themselves that are source. They're just one of the sacred sacraments that bring us to source. So if we think about what's happening in our bodies, we are connecting to, when we say source, we mean universal intelligence, creative energy, 0 point energy. that intelligence, wisdom, compassion, and love that's the source of all things.
Facts.
And just for a minute, what if it turned out, and science is getting closer and closer, I believe, to figuring this out. What if what we call God, or what some people call God, is the mycelial network, that vast network that science is understanding, that is not only in the earth itself, but whose spores are in every single one of us. And so it takes us from a place of decades of misunderstanding what animism is, which is
Mm-hmm.
an important part of our practices
Mm.
together and separately, um, so that we understand animism isn't like some of our ancestors would have said, that just everything has a spirit. This plant has a spirit, this rock has a spirit. That's an oversimplification,
So over.
and it stands as an obstacle that the experience of mushrooms will, I promise you, if nothing else, will take away. Because when you do mushrooms, you realize that what the animistic practice really was at the heart of all folk magic is recognizing that everything in the cosmos is a person. Not that it's got a spirit, because a spirit can be a person or not a person. But
Mm-hmm.
the rock is a person. So when you approach all things that you come in contact with as a person, it changes the way you approach life.
Mm.
Every single thing it isn't transactional anymore. It's interactional.
It's interactional. Yes. It's collaborative.
Yes.
I
And when
love
you do
that
that,
so hard.
you don't, if you're watching this and you say, but I'm afraid to do shrooms, or I have a reason not to want to do it, somebody's in recovery, they don't want to do shrooms, then understand that the mycelial network that you want to connect with, shrooms are just the way to get there.
Right.
You can actually address the spiritual ally, which is the shrooms, and address them with an open heart, make an offering, and say, what can I do to get your assistance, your guidance, your support in my connecting to the mycelial network without having to consume you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you'll get there.
It's crazy that you said that because and just to kind of rewind a little bit, you guys, those who are watching on the replay, please just take a moment and pause and just sit with everything he just said and just let it digest but before you play the rest of this, because that was just so juicy. um because it's true, you described it not just as this sort of ultimate oneness neural network, but you also gave it a sense of personhood, just like you did with all of the animistic type of beliefs, right? It's this idea of personhood. But I think what's really cool is that, like, you are able to interact with this mycelium in such a way that, yes, you don't have to take it like as a drug, but more so as a you like using all of your clairs, if I can describe it like that. Like, I'll give you an example, and I'm sorry I'm stumbling on my words, but it's such an experience that I think, unless you've had it, it's so hard to describe. But I'll give you an example. I had a really bad headache one day, and it was an absolutely horrible week. I mean, one bad thing after another was happening on top of this migraine. And I just remember pulling over to the side of the road, getting on all fours, and just grabbing the ground as if I was a savage fucking animal, and just saying all the things I needed to say, pleading all the things I needed to plead, praying all the things I needed to pray, crying all the cries I needed to cry, right? And I swear to God, Dr. Gianmichael Salvato, that was the most epic experience of my life. Because something heard me and something responded. And that something was in my hands. I was feeling it. There was no disconnect. I'm not a person on all fours. I am this thing in the shape of a person on all fours and then back again. Does that make sense? Do I sound crazy?
No, not at all. And science has already proven your statement. because science has shown us in recent years that when a tree is diseased in a forest and dies, there is an intelligent network, and they now know it's the mycelium, that communicate from the dying tree to all the trees around it that are healthy and
Mm,
say, your sister or brother or sibling needs your help. And the trees will literally send some of their glucose, some of their sugars that help a tree to heal when it's injured,
yes.
through the mycelial network to that other tree. And that other tree could be, across the field, it could be miles and miles away, but
Mm,
they know, and they know because source knows that one expression of it is damaged. So what
right.
you did, and we all, in the 20th century, we kind of as a society got hung up on real new agey ideas about what grounding means. And it was like, oh, I'm going to ground because, fa la 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 la, get sky clad and see all the, dirty old men say, I'm going to see the girls' boobies.
Oh
Um,
my God, that was 97.
yeah, yeah. and yet and I always kid and suspect and say that that the few of the LGBTQ practitioners who weren't all excited about seeing all the naked men's junk was because they'd already seen it, because of our being a little more being the sluts that we are. So they didn't need to see that, and so they understood. And my uncle, Zio Leo Martello, was one of these who said grounding isn't about this like airy fairy bullshit. Grounding is about really recognizing that when we do ancestral worship, when we do or ancestral veneration, when we do ancestral work, we are working with the mycelium because all of our ancestors are there. And I think I
Mm,
was about 16 or 17 or about 17 or 18, I think, when he said that. That's when it clicked. I was like, oh, so the reason that the women in the family created these sacred wines and understood that they never made the sacred host, but they knew how it was made. And
mm,
the reason that the church in 495 of the Common Era, Pope Gelasius said women aren't allowed to celebrate Mass anymore, because they were the ones that were making the sacred wine in the convents. They were the ones that were creating the sacred host for the priests. And what do we see happen right after 495? You start to hear more and more stories of accusations of witchcraft against women,
mm.
and that reaches a crescendo in the Middle Ages, and even further. And these ideas of like satanic panic and witch trials and all that come from the patriarchy, the power structure, being uncomfortable with the fact that that somewhere someone knows all you have to do when you are at your wit's end is get on your hands and knees and grab that dirt.
Mm,
So grounding isn't fa la 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 la. Grounding is getting out there barefooted and walking on the earth, or just mindfully sitting in a place and just feeling yourself, as you said, your legs become like tree trunks, because
mhm.
spiritually your energy is just digging down into the earth where our ancestors are. And it's nice that we now know it's not a metaphor. It's not just because um, our ancestors, most of them, got buried in the earth. It's because our ancestors, including the ones who are cremated, including the ones that have sky funerals where the birds come and take them, that all of them are actually in the mycelial network. Because even
Yeah.
if you're cremated, that the cremains end up in the earth. If you're eaten by
Always.
the birds are going to shit. You're in the earth.
Yeah. It always comes back. And on top of that, it's mythological is also a reality. Gaia, this idea of Mother Earth, like it's like you're giving it that science, you're giving it that piece that really makes it 3D reality versus just this concept of Mother Earth, right? So when you're talking about the mycelium being connecting everything and using the examples of the trees when there's an injured tree, have they shown any evidence of that happening with like flowers or other different types of vegetation?
Yes, with all different types. With plants and house plants, it's the reason that we all pretty much grew up in from my age younger, hearing that if you talk to plants, they're going to grow better. If
Yes.
you, it's the reason that if you take 2 jars of water and you put one on your altar and you put another in front of the news, so you're not saying or doing anything. The one that's getting exposed to all the violence will kill your plants. The one
Mm.
that's exposed to love and the adoration of your spiritual practice will cause those plants to just abundantly grow.
Oh my
And when you know that, then like scientific things start to happen too. Because then, if I recognize that coffee, for example, is a person, that it
gosh.
that animism just doesn't just make me say there's a spirit of coffee, and it's a little mascot for Folgers or whatever. That's not going to help me recognize the person. It's not going to help me honor and truly love and connect with the personhood of coffee. And so when I connect with that personhood, then I realize the last place I want to dump that coffee out is in a drain or in the
Mm.
trash. I want to instead take that coffee and put, or an even better example, pasta water. For well, it's a better example because I'm Sicilian, but
What's
maybe
pasta
some people
water?
make so if you make a pot of pasta,
Oh,
most
pasta
people,
water. Oh, I thought you
yeah,
said Tosca. I'm like, what's
no,
that? Okay,
pasta water.
pasta water.
Most people will take that water and dump it down the drain when they drain the pasta. Instead, you take that water and let it cool and dump it in your plants, and you're feeding the fungi. You're bringing the carbs that produce the fungi to your plants, and you're giving back. You're saying thank you for the wheat that I'm now consuming, or the whatever grains you're consuming, and I give this back because I know that Earth isn't just my father and mother. Earth is me.
Yeah.
I'm an expression of that earth. And so in every spiritual tradition you look at, you're going to find connections like these pithy little sayings that connect you to that truth. When we say ashes to ashes, dust to dust, we're talking about mycelium.
Yes.
When we recognize that there's no difference between the Atman and the para Atman, or in any spiritual tradition, you find that connection to that source of wisdom, and in all of them they find a way of saying you got to ground yourself, you got to slow down, you got to listen. The Palestinian master said that source and I are one, and
Right.
and source is love. And so if you ever experience love, you experience source, and source resides in you and you reside in source.
And I think that's another reason why this idea, because the minute I think that everyone can get on board with an idea that the mycelium, this alive energy, conscious energy, is something that we can collaborate with and co-create with and interact with, the minute that becomes mainstream, the first thing I think about is exploitation. The first thing I think about is just a few of those motherfuckers who didn't quite get the message and are now utilizing that for, like, let's say, manipulating certain things to grow in certain areas of the world, and robbing of other areas or whatever. Who knows? It can go crazy with that. And I feel like when you bring it back to, yeah, but we're the mycelium too, and so therefore you exploit the mycelium, you are exploiting each other, we're doing it to ourselves. That's when it kind of brings us back to reality of, like, you know what, we can do this. And it gives me hope. You know what I mean? Like, this ideology can be adopted so beautifully into any practice, spiritual practice. It offers hope, it offers solutions, it offers answers. Like, it really, a lot of times when we talk about psychedelics, when we talk about any kind of ethnogen that can bring us closer to spirit, there's this stigma, there's this trail of judgment that happens, and it's innate, it's been going on for so long. For this to kind of come in and say, we're not fighting that, honestly, think what you want to think, this is what's happening, is so, ugh, Oh, cheers.
And you know, that's such an important point, because it also brings us to the point where we have to ask ourselves, and there's no easy answer to this question, because some of the answer comes from our roots and our ethnic traditions, cultural traditions, our where our ancestors came from. But you know, it's one of the reasons why someone can go to, let's say, to Mexico or Colombia and take ayahuasca and not have the kind of experience somebody else who you know, maybe mestizo goes to Colombia or Mexico and has a really powerful, life-changing experience.
Right.
The thing that we all have in common on planet Earth is the mycelial network.
Mm,
And so shrooms grow all over the earth. And just because the psychedelic ones bring us there faster doesn't mean that the other ones don't have any value, because they heal other parts of who we are. They heal stuff that's going on in our brains, stuff that's going on in our guts, stuff that's going on with our joints, with inflammation. They heal all of the side effects that come from not being rooted in source.
mm,
And the psychedelics just bring us there. But there's, you know, the psychedelic that works for you, or the entheogen that works for you, um, at best should be one that comes from your culture. And
for
so
sure.
that's why we don't tell people. Like, I believe that in the early pre-institutional church, the Eucharist, and here's how I'll frame it. That recognition that you just talked about. Um, if you think of the Christian tradition, the story that we've all heard, whether you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim or Jain or Buddhist or anything, you've heard the story and seen the pictures of the Last Supper.
Mhm.
That was, you know, for those who maybe don't know what I'm talking about, Jesus's supposed Last Supper the day before he was crucified. And in that story, it talks about, in Aramaic. If you read the real source of the text that became the Bible, it says that he took bread and he said, "This is my flesh sacrifice." He didn't say, "This is my body." So let's just put that nonsense out. He said, "This is my flesh sacrifice." Then he took the wine and said, "This is my blood sacrifice." This represents a new covenant, a new agreement or connection between you and ostensibly the bread and wine source, you know, expressing itself. And so they partook, and then we go up just like one chapter, and in that next chapter, he goes out in the garden with all of his disciples after dinner, and he's having this, you know, intense mystical experience. And
Mm,
he's talking to source and saying, you know, if it's possible, I don't want to have to do this shit. I don't want to have to die. I don't want to have to suffer. So he's going through his dark night of the soul. And
yes.
then he looks up and he says to his disciples, "Yo, none of you can stay awake with me." Why? Because they were all having their own experience, entheogenic
Mm,
experience. So they were all passed out. They were all in altered states of mind. And in those altered states of mind, source meets them where they are. So the person who was
yes.
kind of a little scaredy shit, that was going to run away before the rooster crowed 3 times, he was dealing with his baggage. The one who was his beloved was dealing with their baggage. You know, we hear that at the very end that a young unclothed youth ran from his side and disappeared into the night. You know, we don't know whether that was a reference to an encounter with a human being, or maybe with a spirit guide, with a sprite, you know, with one of the spirits of land, or maybe with the entheogens themselves.
They came,
That
they did their job, and now they're out.
Yes. So we do what you do with what you've got. There, you know, let go of the exotic, because when we go for the exotic, we're almost always culturally appropriated. So
Mhm.
if it feels really exotic, if you feel like, you know, oh, I'm doing something that, you know, you're you know, a pasty white girl, and you're like, I heard that they did this in Nairobi. Well, that's probably not going to give you the results you're looking for, because your ancestors deeply want you to reconnect with them And if they didn't come from Nairobi, guess what? It's going to be a longer distance trip in the mycelium. We are all one. Essential unity is real.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're making a telephone call to somebody, it's easier to make that phone call on Sprint, or, well, not really. You never get Sprint. On T-Mobile. In T-Mobile, if you live in the United States, you're going to have an easier time making a telephone call than if you use a European telecom.
Right.
It's because it's going to have to travel along a longer distance to get to you. So using someone else's tradition is a long way to get to your ancestors.
Right. Oh my gosh, I love it. Oh my gosh. So, and here's okay. So this is a question that's a little unrelated, but it was definitely something that when I took a poll, people wanted to know. Because we're in an age now where everyone loves substitutions, right? So like everyone wants to find an alternative if the mainstream thing isn't just tickling right. And so my question to you is, since the mycelium connects all things, would it be safe to say that if you wanted to make yourself a basil cucumber water and you connect to the spirits and the personhoods of the basil, the cucumber, and the water, by speaking to the mycelium that lives within them, could that be an adequate substitute to connect to divine or to do whatever it is your thing is?
That's another great question, and again, really important for people who are recovering and who don't want to do any kind of substances that'll alter their
Yes.
state of mind artificially. So, and the answer is yes, because the mycelium, not only by going the like really straightforward way that you just explained of actually connecting with, cultivating a relationship with what you're going to use spiritually, with the cucumbers, with the water, with the basil. Maybe somebody isn't even there yet to know how to do that. If you just slow down your breathing, and then this is going to be an aha moment for somebody who's listening, because they're going to say, "That's why meditation works." And yes, it is. When you slow down the breathing, you're breathing in fungi 24/7. The mycelial network surrounds us. It's in us. It's all around us. It moves through us. It's how we interact with source and manifest life. And so all you have to do is slow your breathing down and mindfully know that you're taking in source. You're taking in the universal intelligence. And from there, all of like, what if I told you all you had to do is that, and know that there's 5 steps that every one of us takes, even if we were never taught them. And I talk about this in my last book. I think in my last book, that recognition that you're one with the universe, essential unity, recognition that essential unity means that if I'm one with source, everything has to be one with source, because everything evolves from or rises out of source. Making a declaration of whatever your intended working is, whether that's just a purely spiritual working, a spellcraft, prayer, whatever, healing, whatever that is, then being grateful for the fact that because you're so connected to source, nothing can ever separate you from the manifestation itself.
Mm.
And then release and saying, I let this go. I spoken my truth, and I let it return to the realm of the ancestors, to the wisdom that is source, or birther of the cosmos, to do its good and perfect work. And I know it'll come back to me abundantly multiplied. You just, whatever your tradition is, you just did what every witch does, what every magical practitioner, brujo, what every strega does. You've created the perfect spell, and you've done it without getting initiated. You've done it without all of these things, so that if your ancestors say, now it's time for, like, if you've been frustrated because nobody wants to initiate you into a tradition that resonates with you, maybe it's because you haven't done these earlier steps. And your ancestors, when they see that, they'll say, Now they recognize the importance of essential unity and connecting to the ancestors, which is just another word for source and just another word for the mycelial network. And they're connected to us now. Now we can let that person show up who's going to be their godmother, their godfather, whatever.
Mm.
Does that even make sense?
You laid out the framework of manifestation, you've laid out the framework of connection, you've laid out all the things. Now let's take it a step further. I'm gonna fuck with people. I want to fuck with people. We're gonna take it a step further. Can we say, and this might ruffle some feathers, this might ruffle a lot of feathers, can we say or go as far as to imply that the spirits that we worship, the or venerate, the ancestors that we work with, the elementals that we engage with, can we go as far to say that they are, and we could put it in Jung terms, right, archetypes of the mycelium conscious universal network, um, which does not invalidate their existence, because a tree is an extension and an expression of the mycelium, but that fucking tree exists. You can cut it down. Its branches can slap the shit out of you during a windstorm. It's real. So can we bring that extension to our spirits?
Hell yeah.
Woo!
I mean, that is probably one of the great aspects of it because um, it allows us to reframe what an archetype is. And as a Jungian therapist, it's something I love because so many times we create this either or, and anyone who studied Jung knows that wasn't where Jung was coming from with an either or. And so again, if essential unity is the key, and we look at, as an anthropologist, I look at the beliefs of ancient cultures and current cultures, if we consider that Africa is by most scientific research seems to be the birthplace of humankind, and so our first parents came from there, and we look at the traditions of Ifa and some of the African indigenous traditions, spiritual traditions. What does and say, we'll just pretend, I don't want to argue with anyone who doesn't believe this, but I do, that traditions like Ifa, the African traditional religions, were were the first to try and quantify and explain cosmology. And
Right.
so they believe that before the Orishas arose, our earliest ancestors were plants.
Mm,
And what if that expression of plants is just telling us it's the mycelium? But they didn't
mm,
have a word for mycelium. They didn't have a word for that. And you merge that story, the ancient story in the Ifa tradition and the Yoruba tradition, merge that with science saying fungi are the longest living, continuous living species of life on the planet
mm.
and possibly in the cosmos. Now we kind of have this interconnected web that says something can be an archetype, it can have a spiritual significance, it can have a mythological or midrashic story, because those are the things we impose on the spiritual beings.
Yeah.
You know, when we say when culture talks about um, you know, Krishna, for example, or Shiva, for example, there are aspects of the whole person in them, and there's a reason why Shiva is the one smoking ganja, because Shiva is the one that's practicing a yoga that is the full body yoga. Krishna is the one that teaches us the unconditional love yoga, the bhakti yoga, and there, that doesn't mean that they're not two separate beings, or that the mother is not a separate being. You know, that the need, if you're in that spiritual practice, you need to be able to slay the attachment to ego, not the ego. I think Jung would be happy with me for saying
Yes,
that.
definitely.
You don't need to slay the ego. That's a part of being fully human and fully alive, but you need to slay the attachment. And so the Shiva and Krishna archetypes don't work, but the Kali archetype works. And when we can make examples like that in every tradition, the mother and the son, the story of the sun and the moon, the like you said, the elementals.
Yeah.
What if all of them were not just archetypes, but they were opportunities for us to connect with an ancestor? And that, I think, is the simplest way to approach your spirituality, no matter who you are, no matter what it is just to consider everything that you come in contact with to be an ancestor.
An
And
ancestor.
someone might be listening and say, hey, that's stupid. This table is not an ancestor. No, but the table is made from a tree, if it's made
Mhm.
out of wood. It's made from horses' hooves, if there was glue used in the wood. It's made from water that had to sustain the tree, air that had to sustain the tree, fire, which had to clear the land at times. So yes, your ancestors are there in the wood. They're there in the pen, even though it's plastic and it's bad for the environment. There
Yeah.
is still a purpose for it, and if that purpose is to lead you to, I mean, there's a guy by the name of Houston Smith, probably one of the greatest religious historians in our world. He referred to this as the best kept secret, that there was profound knowledge in the ancient world of plants and herbs and fungi passed down from generation to generation, because our ancient ancestors, without science, without all of the benefits we have today, they knew that was going to be the only thing that could save us.
Yes. It's an ancestral tradition, and its god is the mother mycelium. I mean, it's that is so dope. This time flew by and I still have a million more questions. We honestly barely got through it because I kept throwing in some curveballs in there. But I want to say before we get going, how can people find you? What are you up to? Is there any new projects? Where can people join your school? Tell us everything.
There are a couple. This was just such such a joy. First, I got to say, like I love talking with you. There are a few podcasters out there who every time we get together, it's not like being on a podcast. It's like reconnecting with family, and the conversations are the same conversations we'd have over a bong, or I mean a cup of tea. Um, you know, um, and so this was one of those moments, and I think that probably the thing that I don't know, if there was something that I wanted to like really convey to someone who's listening, it would be that no matter um, where you're starting from, there is something for you to connect with in this conversation. So where I'm at right now is that we've got this mystery school where we teach folk magic traditions from around the world. Some amazing teachers that have joined me in that program. Um, but we've also got I'm getting ready to do a really big course this fall that talks about magical practice from a trauma informed perspective, so that we
Yeah.
can do a holistic magical practice that actually heals us and the world around us,
Yes.
rather than like having to go out and buy all the things and do dress up in all the different clothes, and like that's all fun and I love aesthetic and everything too, but like if healing isn't coming out of it in service, and again, you just inspire me in the work that you do when I watch your TikToks and all of that, where you're so aware and so mindful driving home I mean, I love that story about seeing the swarm, because those are the things that connecting with the mycelial network brings to us. It lets us see other realms that are coexisting, the multiverse as it coexists, realms that are outside of our own,
Mm.
that are always interacting with us and we might not know it. It makes us a little more aware when we need to be, so that we can be of service to someone else. And that's why the Houston Smith said, that you have to. Well, actually, it's written in Eleusis, where the mystery school of Demeter and Persephone was, and it says that you got to die before you die in order to experience eternal life.
Mm.
And if you think about it, every tradition has a story that's similar to that. This is that opportunity to die before you die. You die to the shit that isn't working and embrace the stuff that can bring you that connection. So that you recognize your ancestral worship isn't just about what you're going to get. It's not about going to grandma and grandpa and great grandma and grandpa and saying, this is what I need. We want this house. We want this car. I need more money for rent. It's about asking them, what can I do to be of service to you? Because we're the hands and feet for the ancestors who are now the mycelial network. So their job is just to be our wisdom, our compassion, our forgiveness, and our awareness. Our
Yes.
job is to do the work.
It brings a whole new definition to the stewards of nature, right? Stewards of the mother. Dr.
Totally.
Gianmichael Salvato, thank you so much for being on here tonight. You guys here on the live, thank you so much for showing up. Those who are going to be watching on the replay, thank you so much. Make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. And most importantly, remember, this is how we grow. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.